Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today we have a very special interview with an Israeli diplomat from the embassy in London. Warm welcome to the program, and we have a very special guest on today's program. Her name is Efrat Perry, and she is the new Director for Public Affairs at the Israeli Embassy in London, the focal point for Christian evangelicals who love Israel and the Jewish people. Efrat, warm welcome to the program.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. And Efrat, can you share with us your life growing up in Israel, and did you always want to be a diplomat?
Well, no, I didn't always want to be a diplomat. I was born in a kibbutz, and actually my first real passion was foreign news. I used to read the papers since I was a small child, and especially the international news. I was always interested in finding what's going on in other places. And then when I grew up, I discovered Chinese, and I studied Chinese language and history and culture. And then when I joined the ministry, which was actually almost it was a fluke. My mother suggested that I'll do that. It was after I already had a Chinese background. And then when I joined the ministry, I find myself in Beijing as my first post.
Amazing. So I can take you one step back. Brought up in Israel, brought up in a kibbutz, which is a wonderful environment for children. You're in Israel in the midst of the Middle East. What was it about China that really sparked your interest to learn about China? Because we see that today China is kind of dominating our news, but going back a few years, China really wasn't on anyone's news agenda.
True. I think the main attraction was the fact that it's not in the Middle East, that it's not about Israel, and it's completely different and foreign culture than Israel. Because I grew up thinking Israel is the center of the world, and I think if you study Israel history, it is the center between Africa, Asia, and Europe. You think that and everything happening here in the Middle East, and especially in Israel, but then China seemed to be something very far and very interesting. I think that the idea that it's foreign, it was the main attraction. I didn't know that China is going to be so important only a few years later. That wasn't the reason why I decided to really invest in this culture and this history. But I feel myself very lucky because I think I have a body of knowledge that very few people have.
So share with us your first posting. You passed the exams to be a diplomat. Your first posting is to Beijing, China, which you specialized in for a number of years. But not only are you in China, but you're representing the state of Israel, fulfilling the dreams and the aspirations of your ancestors for over 2,000 years to be back in the land, to have your own state. And here you are representing the state of Israel to China. What was that posting like? And share some stories that our viewers would be interested in about your time being in Beijing.
Sure. Actually, you mentioned that I passed the exam, so I want to skip back a little bit and talk about the cadet course, which was an amazing experience. It was 7 months of very intense studying, and studying not only in class, but also through tours around Israel. And even though, I traveled around Israel as a child with my family and friends, it was a kind of rediscovering our country, because we learned about Arab and Jewish relations. We learned about our borders and the situations there. We learned about different aspects of our culture, learned about different religions, something that a regular Israeli school does not put a lot of emphasis about. Christianity in Israel, Islam in Israel, those are very, very important, as well as learning more about Judaism and the diversity within Judaism in Israel. That was very interesting and a wonderful learning experience. Now, because I had my Chinese background, it was clear I was going to Beijing. My job at the embassy in Beijing was the spokesperson and the head of public diplomacy. And I think because China as a culture is very separated than what we call the Western culture, actually what they call the Western culture, its point of reference is very different. And I think many people judge China through Western eyes. And I think this way they kind of miss out. But I had plenty of stories and adventures in China and Beijing. It was a wonderful experience and an adventure. I enjoyed having conversation with taxi drivers, and most of the Chinese people are very positive towards Israel. They love the Jewish people. They appreciate the Jewish story and also the Israel story, the success of it. And it was very kind of warming to hear that again and again.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And now you have been appointed as the Director for Public Affairs, the Israeli Embassy, which is a very, very important role as a diplomat in the embassy in London. So did you request to go to London, or was this something that you were just told that you have to go on behalf of the Israeli Foreign Ministry? How democratic are they? Here we go, letting the secrets out now.
Well, no, actually, we get to decide. We have a few options, and of course, it depends on what are the options, which places are, the people are getting back to Israel or moving to another post. We decided London because it was a center of, it's one of the important centers of Israel foreign policy, and of course, important center of the world. Especially media wise, it's I think except maybe New York, it's the second place in its importance. So I think London was a wonderful opportunity, and I think now with what's going on now in the UK, after Brexit is over. It's a new opportunity for Israel and UK to improve our relations, although our relations are very good. But I think the new situation is a new opportunity for those relations.
Absolutely. So can you describe for our viewers what your role is as being Director for Public Affairs? Because you're also in charge of the desk that engages with the Israeli Embassy, with the evangelical Christian community across the UK. So you're a very important person for our viewers to know.
Thank you. Well, my portfolio is pretty diverse. I'm in charge of the relations with religious groups, of course, including the evangelist, and also Jewish community, and also other communities. It's kind of difficult to explain, but I usually explain it as a reach out to new communities. And of course, I also in charge of social media and other let's say, I wouldn't call them communities, but other point of interest for our relations. For example, climate. That's also an important part.
Absolutely. We also see that the profile of women within the Israeli Foreign Ministry is is impressive, and the fact, the way that the Israeli Foreign Ministry just encourages more women to take positions of power and influence. And of course, we've got Zippy Hotoveli as our ambassador, and she's great. What does it feel like to work for a female ambassador and a former deputy foreign minister in Zippy?
I think I'm very proud that we have a woman ambassador in London. I think it's a very important post. And of course, and the ministry was always very advanced in promoting women's rights. I can only hope they will continue to do that. I know as a woman, I feel that I work in a very important place, and I think they put an emphasis on that specifically, and it's important for them to promote women as much as they can.
Let's have a look at this excellent video that's produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry that looks at the opportunity that women have in Israel's foreign ministry.
I joined the foreign ministry 37 years ago.
I joined exactly 5 years ago.
In my course, we had 5 women out of 20 at the very beginning.
Ours was the first course that had an equal number of men and women.
There was one noticeable woman, I can't even name her, it was Coletta Vital. And we had very, very few ambassadors, sometimes one, sometimes two.
Our director of training was a woman, and I believe she was also working with you in Moscow, Ilana. And throughout the years, I think we've always seen both deputy director generals and ambassadors.
The only time I had a boss who was a woman, it was a political appointee and not someone from inside the ministry.
Up till 2 months ago, I had the privilege to work with a deputy director general for coordination and planning, who is now ambassador to Geneva. And I think she's a model for young diplomats, for women, but I think in general she's a model for all diplomats, men and women alike.
A lot of work, I think, was done from that period to ours. It's not that we reach equilibrium and it's 50-50, but the numbers are growing quite consistently all the time. And the main issue which I thought is important is awareness. I think our ministry is very aware of the need to keep to promote women, to keep them in important positions, and I think this is something which inspires some optimism.
I actually agree with you 100%, and I think that that's one of the major changes that happened in the last few years. I think that perhaps 30 years ago it was up to the women to push themselves and to create space for themselves. But I do believe that today in 2020 there is an understanding in the ministry that gender equality is not just a fight of women. It's something that men in the ministry also aspire to.
One of the initiatives which was very inspiring and was several years ago creating this network of women in diplomacy, which includes both Israeli diplomats and women diplomats who serve in Israel.
I think it's very much this spirit that we feel today in the ministry of women's solidarity, of women supporting each other. You can always find an encouraging mentor as the younger generation. I always felt like I have an open door with the female diplomat.
Ruth, what would you like to see happening in this office in 20 years?
We started here 5 years ago having the same number of men and women, and I would love to see in 20 years in the decision-making levels the same number of men and women. And I think we're headed towards that direction.
So that video was courtesy of the Israeli Foreign Ministry. I'm very grateful for them, for us showing the work they do to help promote women within the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Efrat, one of your roles, as you mentioned earlier, is to reach out to the evangelical Christian community, and consider that most of us have been locked down what feels almost for well over a year and a half. There hasn't been any pro-Israel meetings during that time. What there has been on Zoom. And your assistant Chloe did a great job in organising an online meeting with the new ambassador and myself to the evangelical Christian community as well. So now we're kind of coming out of COVID-19 and things are getting back a little bit more to normal. How can you re-engage the Christian supporters of Israel to get more involved and stand with Israel, get involved in events and feel connected again, as many of us have longed to go to Israel, but we haven't been able to?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that I think the support of the support of those groups is very important, and it's very important not only for me and to the embassy, but to the state of Israel. This support and love is extremely, it's very important for us, and I understand that COVID kind of changed the rules, and I hope that soon enough that those groups could be able to arrive to Israel to enjoy different sites. Right now what we are thinking is thinking about meeting those groups here in London or wherever I can reach out for them. And I understand that Zoom, that we all have Zoom fatigue, but I think the future is kind of a hybrid events that Zoom will take part, but I'm looking forward to have face-to-face meetings and to listen to what they need from us, and according to that to think of activities that we can do together, think how can we support those groups.
Absolutely, because one thing that's emerged over the last few years, particularly since about 2014, is all the pro-regional Israel groups across the country who do a great job in campaigning on behalf of Israel, engage with Christians and Jewish leaders as well to get involved, and then just promote Israel locally across the UK. So how important is it with your role to just nurture and encourage these? Again, the same problem with the Christian community. Many of them being cut off and having to rely on Zoom events, haven't been able to have big events where the ambassador is able to come and speak and they can connect with Israel on that level.
Yes, so those groups are very important for us. I think they're doing wonderful work, and we are doing our best to support them and to hear their needs. We can supply materials. I think the most important thing is to have this connection and to have this day-to-day interaction, so we can understand better how to assist them with their work.
Excellent. And in the course of preparing for this program, I spoke to you the day before the recording, and you wanted to re-engage people with Israel that don't really have an understanding. They think that they know something about Israel, but really they don't, because the media portrayal and our mainstream media of Israel is completely different from the reality in Israel, isn't it? And how do you think that you can really help to set the narrative straight regarding Israel and Israel's situation in the Middle East, so that more people are better informed and better educated? The fact that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, that Israel is the only place where Christianity and religious faith is actually flourishing in the region. It's the only country really that, and Israel's economy is catching up with so many in Europe now, that Israel is not only an economic powerhouse but also a military powerhouse, and you have institutions of democracy which is completely alien to the rest of the region.
Yes, I think that's the big question. I mean, how do we change the narrative, or at least put our narrative out there? I think that's the main challenge of my work, and we are now thinking of new ways how to approach this. I think one of the biggest problems is disinformation in social media. I think social media is the new, it's not even new, it's the current front that we have to be there, every day, and especially in social media, there's room for those small groups that, although you mentioned earlier that they don't want to connect through Zoom, but through Zoom you can reach out to a bigger audience, and through social media you can reach out even to a bigger audience, and I think that's the platform that we should focus on, and also on that, because social media is work. It's a full-time job. You need to be aware of what you write or how you write it, what type of pictures to use. And we have expertise for that. It's also a place that we can assist those groups, and we are assisting those groups. It's very important for us to keep on this work. And what you said, the bigger picture about understanding Israel in a better way, I think the discourse here is very shallow. I think people are shouting and not listening to one another. I have a vision that I want to have a dialogue with various groups. And I think those religious groups that are already pro-Israel, they can assist us with getting to new communities, to have this reach out to the general society here in the UK. I think it's very important for them their role is very important for us in that sense. And it's an ongoing work. There isn't any, I don't think there's like a magical solution for that. It's everyday work to do that. But I think through dialogue, you can really reach out to people. You can listen to opinions that you disagree, as long as they're respectful. I think it's a good opportunity to have a dialogue.
No, absolutely. So let's have a look at this excellent news report put together by CBN, and this is putting the record straight when it comes to Israel.
While not well known by American audiences, actress, producer, and activist Noah Tishby is a household name in her homeland. Born and raised in Tel Aviv, Noah got her start in the Israeli entertainment industry as a teenager. Over the years, she's appeared in many of Israel's leading TV, film, theater, and ad campaigns. When she moved to Hollywood, however, Noah realized most people she encountered in America knew little about Israel's history and culture. Others she met held misconceptions about the Jewish state. To set the record straight, Noah has written a book, Israel, a simple guide to the most misunderstood country on earth.
Well, Noah joins us now. Welcome to the 700 Club.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Tell us about your experience in L.A. Here you go from trying to make it in the entertainment industry in Tel Aviv, and then you get told this wonderful, if you want to make wine, you need to be in France. If you want to make movies, you need to be in L.A. So you moved to L.A., and you now discover something that you weren't ready for.
Yeah, so I started my career in the entertainment industry in Israel at a very young age and was very blessed and had great success over there.
Age 12.
Yeah, or 8, depends on when you start counting.
Okay.
Started doing
and your parents didn't know?
My parents didn't know, but I always say that if you have a child that has a calling, you can't stop that child. So they were very, they were just like, okay, go ahead and do what you want to do. So I started my career in the entertainment industry and was very self-centered in that way and didn't think much about Israel or the Jewish people or what does that mean spiritually to be Jewish and to be an Israeli. And then I moved to Los Angeles. I did great in Israel in entertainment. I moved to Los Angeles to pursue my career in entertainment. And then I started encountering the severe misunderstandings about Israel. And I come from a political family, so my mom always jokes that my DNA kicked in. And I found myself in this position of explaining to people about Israel and telling them, like, no, it's not, okay, Hamas is not actually Hezbollah, and there's, here are the borders, this is what happened. And I found myself in this position of explaining to people what Israel is about. And throughout the years, took it professionally, and then I wrote this book. And the reason I wrote this book is because Israel's safety and security, it's not a Jewish people issue. It's not an Israeli people issue. it's a U.S. national security issue and Western civilization issue. So as I'm sure you know, and a lot of your viewers know, Israel's a stabilizing force within the Middle East. And there's no negating the indigenous justification, the moral justification, the historical justification of the existence of the State of Israel in the land of Israel. And I just couldn't sit still and watch people not know what they're talking about while having a lot of opinions about it, which is the worst. Like, if you don't know anything about it, just don't talk. And I just had to do something about it, so I wrote this book.
And it's great to see that a famous Israeli actress is using her fame to promote Israel and tell the truth about Israel. And that's it, isn't it? And this is what this program does as well, is to tell the truth about Israel, to put the narrative straight and put Israel within its context within the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so now we have a new government. And I think this new government is a new opportunity. We had some political turmoil before, so now I think it's time for actual work, to get the work done. Also including what we spoke earlier about getting the narrative straight here or in the US as well. But I think the most important thing is to understand that the new government is also see those pro-Israel groups as very important, and they see them and their work very important. So it's a significant point of view that I want to convey, that the new government, although it's a mixture of political views, it's still very much wants the connection with evangelist groups and appreciate them.
Excellent, that's really good to know. And also we have a new president in place in Israel as well, in Isaac Herzog, who I did a program of only recently, which has got an incredible British and Irish heritage. With him as the new president, do you think that he will use his position to strengthen, develop stronger relations with Britain and also the Republic of Ireland?
Yes, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. The last president, President Rivlin, also made a wonderful work in that sense. But yes, President Herzog is, because of his family history and because of his prior connection to this country, it is a wonderful opportunity to see how the relations can evolve. And it's another way in which our two nations can collaborate.
Absolutely. And of course, the biggest foreign policy issue facing your new Israeli government, that's led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, is the Iranian nuclear issue. The fact is that the United Nations' own watchdog, the IAEA, has come out and said that Iran is possibly weeks away from developing nuclear weapons. We know that previous presidents of Iran, like Ahmadinejad, the supreme leader of Iran, Khomeini, has called for the destruction of the State of Israel. Israel sees Iran as an existential threat, but also the Arab states are also extremely concerned about Iran having nuclear weapons, and then poses a direct threat to European and also American security as well. Why do you think that the world is turning a blind eye to this incredibly dangerous threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran?
So I think now we are, because of COVID, and because of the climate, there are two topics that kind of take the attention, the public attention of this topic of Iran. But actually, it's not a new topic. It never changed. The danger of Iran is very, very. It's here and it's not going away. Also, of course, the nuclear issue is the most important, but it's also important to understand that Iran is a threat because it has proxies all around the Middle East, and it's not an Israeli issue. It's not even a Middle East issue anymore. It's a world issue. It's a threat to the entire world, and it's part of this. Alliance with other forces that are terror forces. They are connected to Hezbollah. They are connected all over the world with their proxies, and this is the real threat. And this is sometimes that people don't understand that. Because we talk about the nuclear bomb, of course it's the most urgent issue, but it's important to understand that Iran is not only one country. They have proxies all around the Middle East and the world, and therefore they are existential threat. And we are not the only one who thinks so. Other countries in the Middle East also believe that. And this is the most important thing to understand. And of course now I see that the attention is divided between COVID and climate. And COVID, obviously, it's also a threat, but it's very different. And I think now COVID is in the beginning of, and I'm very, very careful when I say that, but it looks like we are starting to see the end of it. And Israel, by the way, is one of the First Nations that is very advanced in that area. But the Iran issue is here to stay, and it needs to be addressed as soon as possible.
Yeah, because for people who don't understand the complexities of the Middle East and the players involved, and when you actually break down who those players are, the Islamic terrorist organizations such as such as Hamas, and in Lebanon, Hezbollah and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, that they get their power and their strength from the Iranian regime, don't they? And not only are they causing havoc and mayhem in Israel, as we saw last May when they launched all those thousands of rockets and missiles into Israel, they're destabilizing Lebanon, destabilizing Yemen, they're keeping Assad in power in Syria, and their ultimate goal is to create the Islamic Shiite Crescent and dominate the entire Middle East. And that's important for people that don't know much about Israel to understand that the Iranians are the main players, or the Iranian government, I should say, are the main players behind the antagonists against Israel.
Yes, and also it's good that you mentioned, because there's a difference, and also the state of Israel, we are different between the Iranian regime, and the Iranian people.
Absolutely.
There are Iranian people in Israel. It's actually a very important part of our culture, and we appreciate the Iranian culture. It's a very ancient culture, and we even have connections. But the Iranian regime did not accept the state of Israel. As you mentioned before, they wish to annihilate it, and of course, we're not going to accept that. And it is a force of evil in the world, and should not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon.
Absolutely. So moving on to another groundbreaking movement that's really been developing in the Middle East, and that's the Abraham Accords, and no one saw that coming. It's a year now since its first anniversary, in which Israel signed a peace treaty with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, then followed on by Sudan. We're seeing incredibly warm relations now developing also with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states. So the sea change in the Middle East is changing. Now, it's also survived a change of government in Israel, and it's also survived a change of administration in the United States. And despite the fact that Biden has brought Iran back in from the cold, wants to re-engage with the Palestinian Authority, and has been ignoring pretty much the peace benefits of the Abraham Accords, we now see that this is getting stronger and stronger. So can you explain to us why the Abraham Accords and Israel's relations with these Arab states is now developing that no one really expected would develop?
Well, actually, we had relations with them before. It's usually how it works in the diplomatic world. You have kind of under the radar relations, and then it become official. I think the ground was right on both sides, and I think the surprise in which it got known is because many people see the Middle East in a very shallow way, and there isn't one Muslim world that you interact with. They are different between themselves. They have different interests and different cultures, and I think they see the potential in Israel, and it's important for them as well to have diplomatic relations with Israel. And of course, the Abraham Accords create, as I mentioned before, the discourse is very shallow, and the Abraham Accords, as its own existence, creates a question around people that are talking about the Middle East, because they used to see things in black and white. And the Abraham Accords brings out gray, but I would say different colors. Suddenly you understand that it's not black and white, that there are different nuances, and there are things that can be changed in the Middle East. And now the Abraham Accords, a year later, as you mentioned, you can see how strong it is, and it's one of the reasons why, because it's real. It's real. There are interests between the countries, and there are different various agreements that were signed during this year. In October, our foreign minister visited them. So it's going to get more and more developed.
I think it's important to note for our viewers as well that the difference between the agreements with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates to the peace treaties that Israel has with Jordan and also with Egypt is the fact that it also includes normalizations with Israel, which is the first time that that's really ever happened before. The other two peace treaties are a cold peace, but they're still a workable peace. But this is a normalization process where Israelis are flying over to the United Arab Emirates and the Arabs are then flying over to Israel to visit Jerusalem, and there's cooperation on science and technology and innovation and also security and military ties as well. So it is a kind of new relationship, isn't it, that Israel's having with the Arab world?
Yes, it is. It's again, it creates a different part of the discourse, because you can see that we can collaborate on various aspects with Arab countries, and not only that, there is a true will on both sides to develop those connections. It's academic connections and business-to-business connection. It's not only government; it's people-to-people, business-to-business, and it can only get deeper. And as you mentioned, flights, tourism, the skies are the limit.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN News report that reflects on the first anniversary of the signing of the Abraham Accords.
The establishment here at the Knesset of the Abraham Accords Caucus is the next step in solidifying the relationship between Israel and her Sunni Arab neighbors. Caucus co-chair Ruth Wasserman-Lande says leaders across Israel's political spectrum are uniting behind the accords.
And as you could see, you had people from former government, current government. The fact that this is a real national interest of the country and of the region, and I pray to God that this is just the beginning.
Bahrain's ambassador shared his country's support for expanding and protecting the accords.
It can become the mechanism that enables us, despite the differences, to put our hands together and work towards one goal: a safer, more prosperous and secure Middle East.
The event brought together many architects of the accords, like Jared Kushner, who says the peace agreements have started a ripple effect.
It's spreading throughout the Middle East, it's spreading throughout the world. Muslims in Indonesia, Muslims in Saudi Arabia, Muslims in Malaysia, Muslims in Pakistan, they're seeing that Israel is not what they've been told it is, and they're seeing that Israelis are welcoming their Muslim brothers, and they're seeing that there's a lot that we could be doing together.
This Bahraini shares a unique perspective after working with Israelis.
This is my first visit, but it's not my first interaction with Israeli people. I'm a humanitarian, so I do a lot of work internationally, and luckily enough, I had the pleasure to meet a lot of Israelis around the world who are volunteering with me as well. And to me, they're great people.
U.S. representatives pledged support to advance the accords.
The Biden administration now continues working to expand normalization efforts and to deepen Israel's existing relationships and to bring new countries into the fold.
Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu credited the Trump administration for changing policy towards Israel and Arab leaders.
They understood now that the road to Washington passed not through Ramallah, but through Jerusalem, because that was the American policy. They said, if you want even better relations with the United States, then make peace with Israel. So the change in American policy was critical. I have to say that without it, you could bake the cake, but you can't finish it. You can't put the topping on it without this crucial change.
Netanyahu added, while Israel and these Sunni Arab nations face a common enemy, he's optimistic about the future.
I believe that if we continue to move in this direction, and if we don't fall into yesterday's traps and the failed policy of the past, our grandchildren will look back at this moment and say that the peace of Abraham brought the sons of Abraham together.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Knesset, Jerusalem.
Another excellent report put together there by Chris Mitchell, and you can watch Jerusalem Dateline on Revelation TV. Efrat, so I think we also have to bring in a kind of warning that our viewers need to be vigilant, particularly from the BDS, the Boycott, Divestments and Sanctions movement, as we see that one of the young Irish up-and-coming writers called Sally Rooney has said that she doesn't want her latest novel to be translated into Hebrew, which is offensive because clearly she's not doing that to any other nation and wants to support the BDS against Israel. Isn't it time that she saw Israel for herself to see how welcoming the Israelis are, what Israel's doing for our Arab community, and the fact is it's the Palestinian Authority that's suppressing their own people and their freedoms, and she should be looking Israel being the solution rather than the problem?
Actually, I think it's a wonderful solution. I invite Sally Rooney to visit Israel, of course, after COVID restrictions are over. But yeah, as you mentioned before, that's the best way to understand Israel, to see it through your own eyes. And about the BDS, and especially about Sally Rooney and other artists, I think artists, if you have something to say, you should say to anybody who's willing to answer, to listen. And it's, I think it's really not the right way to do, to convey your message. I think quite the opposite. If you have criticism, let's hear it. We can have an argument. It's okay, as long as it's respectful. But when you are boycotting, you are closing the discussion. There's nobody to talk with. So how can things change? That's my main issue with BDS. I think now BDS, especially in this country, has changed. I think it became more they not necessarily need to demonstrate anymore. It's more subtle, but it's still there, and it's something that we are fighting, because again, boycotting is not the right way.
Absolutely. I also want to move on to one of your remits that you are having to deal with, Efrat, and that's the growing influence of social media. And with social media comes cancel culture, wanting to cancel anything that don't agree with a kind of woke agenda. And then on top of that, what we've seen certainly over the recent conflict that Israel had with the Islamic terrorist organization Hamas in Gaza, is nothing but a rise of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. And we know that if our society tolerates this, then it will actually eat and destroy our own society. So it's imperative that we stand up against Jew hatred.
Yes, I separate those, because Jew hatred and anti-Semitism is an issue of its own and needs to be fought in all fronts, including social media. And many times you see people that would not see themselves as anti-Semitic or racist, but they're using racist and anti-Semitic caricatures or phrases, and they need to be schooled that it's not that they're using anti-Semitism, but even if they don't see themselves as one. But another issue is disinformation, and in that sense, Israel is one of I think one of the places that suffers most about it, because you see pictures that are with description that this is what's going on in Israel, but it's not. It's something that happened in Syria, or it happened years ago, and people use that as disinformation in order to promote their own opinion, and they use lies in order to that, and that also needs to be stopped. And those two issues are very important for me. And again, I want to repeat how important those pro-Israel groups to work on those fronts on social media, to understand it and to be aware when you are you see this information, when you see a picture that the phrases are wrong. It's very important to be aware, and to be aware that this information is a true problem, not only regarding to Israel. It's a problem in this world of social media, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And I think more and more countries and other actors understand it, and with technology advancement, it's also taking more and more space. So I think people are starting to understand better this situation, and I think in the long run we will see more regulation about it to confront this disinformation.
Let's see these excellent videos that are actually produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry that tackle the big issue that is Jew hatred online and being used on social media. And a very important message that we all got to stand up against Jew hatred and say no to anti-Semitism. Very good message there put together by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. In fact, we're coming down towards the end of the programme, and we're very pleased that you're in your new role, and I'm sure that you'll be engaging over the course of your time during this post in the UK with a lot of Christian evangelicals who love Israel and the Jewish people. And you talked about what you want to do, but how can they help you? How can they help the Jewish people? How can they help Israel? Because we know that our precious Jewish community in this country feel very threatened, and we also know that Israel's being threatened. We talked about the Iranian threat, we talked about threats posed by Hezbollah, Hamas, the BDS, this rise of anti-Semitism, and yet Israel is a haven of peace and democracy in the region. So what role can our viewers play to help stand with Israel?
I think they can continue to do what they do, which is to support Israel. Support Israel when they see racist posts on Twitter and act and respond to it, or at least to complain to Twitter to remove it. They can help by keeping Jewish people safe, and act out when they see a Jewish person being attacked, or even attacked verbally. They can come to Israel, of course. I hope soon our gates will be open, and we'll see many tourists again. And I think that's the main issue. It's just to keep on their support, which is very important, and it's very heartwarming and helpful for us to really face anti-Semitism and Jew hatred around the world.
Absolutely. So talking about tourism, now I believe that Israel is opening herself up to tourists very shortly. You don't know the answers, so but I believe that sometime in November that the Israeli government is opening up Israel to those who have been vaccinated from COVID-19. It's an opportunity then for Christians to visit Israel and see the places that we haven't seen for 2 years, to re-engage with the Israelis, to eat Israeli food, to enjoy the warmth and the sunshine that Israel, that we're sadly lacking in this country. How important is it that our viewers watching, when they get the opportunity to visit Israel?
It's extremely important, and I hope that Israel will be open for tourists maybe next month. Again, it's important for us to have as many tourists, pro-Israel tourists as you can. It's important for us for you to visit those places, those holy places that you haven't visited for so long.
Absolutely. I'm going to surprise you now with a question, because I've only just thought about this one. Did a program a couple of weeks ago, and I found that the head of FIFA, the World Football Association, has said that because of the success of the Abraham Accords, that Israel could potentially host a World Cup. What are your thoughts on Israel hosting a World Cup? It's going to be in Qatar in next year in 2022. And knowing that the Israelis are a football mad nation and nearly got a result against Scotland in the World Cup qualifiers. What would it mean for Israel if the World Cup was to come to Israel and you'd see World Cup games in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and Haifa?
That would be amazing. I think Israel would love to host the World Cup. Weather is definitely better than Qatar. And yeah, that would be wonderful. And I think everybody would appreciate it if we can host the World Cup. As you mentioned, Israelis are football enthusiasts. I live with one. And they're going to have audiences in all the games, all the matches. And also, it's not too far from everywhere, right? It's kind of the center.
It's in the middle, yeah.
It's a very short flight, so I think there's a lot of potential there. And I think, again, the Abraham Accords kind of, I think they have a shift in other people's mind about Israel. They don't see it as a segregated place in the world. They see it as connected with its neighbors.
Absolutely. I think that's a good way to finish the program. Well, firstly, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on the Middle East Report, Efrat, and congratulations on your new position at the Israeli Embassy. And, you know, you have our support, you have our prayers, and I'm sure that you'll do a great job in that position, and you'll meet so many Christian evangelicals right across the UK that love Israel, that want to stand with the Jewish people, and they should give you that encouragement and support to continue the excellent work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simon.
Pleasure. And I just want to thank you for watching today's program. It's so important that we engage with the Israeli Embassy in London and the work they do in explaining Israel's righteous cause in Israel and the Middle East, and bring a deeper connection between the state of Israel and the Christian community right across the UK, if not right across the world. So let's continue to show them our love and our support, because we know that we're living in dangerous and difficult times. So thank you for watching this edition of the Middle East Report.